Hey Beaklings, today I want to talk to you about really the backbone of what genetics is all about, or at least how we solve our problems, and it's all about probability, right? It's very simple math, and everything you've been doing so far is really setting yourself up so that you can understand probability, okay? So every time you've solved the Punnett square up until this point, you probably don't even know it, but you've been doing little math problems back and forth. So pretty cool. Probabilities is very important because that's what genetics is all about, right? It's not an exact science. A lot of times we don't know exactly what's going to happen. Sometimes we kind of have a good idea, but a lot of times it's a coin flip, and you really don't know what are the odds of this happening. And you're going to be good enough by the end of this chapter to help people answer questions like that. What are the odds of this or that? Especially we're going to be getting into the diseases and complex inheritance patterns, so it's really neat. So probability is very important. I'll tell you a story about it. So you all know a coin flip, right? A coin flip is 50-50 chance. So if I said, what are the odds of flipping tails? You'd say, well, it's 50%. Well, there is, I won't say his name because I don't know who's going to watch this video, but I'm friends with a terrible human being that was our college roommate, one of our roommates in college. And we all couldn't stand this kid. He was a jerk. He would steal and fight, and he was just not a good person. But we liked to gamble when we were in college. We'd put money on just about anything we could think of. So one of the time we were watching the Super Bowl, and he went and looked up previous coin flips, and he's like, hey guys, guess what? It was, I don't remember the exact story, but I think it was heads for 3 years in a row. So our friend Sean is his name. Sean was like, we gotta bet tails. And we all look at each other like, what is he talking about? And he's like, think about it. It was heads 3 years in a row. Do you hear what I'm saying? It's gotta be tails this year. And in the back of our minds, we're thinking, man, this kid really thinks that. He thinks that because it was heads in the past, that those past events affected future outcomes, right? And that's crazy, right? Because what are the odds of that year's Super Bowl being heads or tails? 50-50, right? So probabilities and understanding probabilities will help you answer questions like that. Okay, and it's pretty cool when you get into genetics, and it can answer questions as simple as like I have these gorgeous, beautiful free earlobes right here, right? Whereas my mom, she has attached earlobes. Okay, my dad had free and my mom has attached, so they're stuck to the side of her head. So we don't let her out in public. We put earmuffs on her, so people don't get upset. So just kidding. So that makes me a heterozygote, right? Because I have free and they're dominant, but I know my mom has attached. So she gave me, let's say, the little e, and my dad gave me big E. Okay? So what are my odds that I'm going to give what allele to my kids? Well, it's 50-50, right? I could either give the big E allele or the little e allele, right? That's an independent event. And then I would have to see, what my wife would give our kids. Okay, my wife has free earlobes. Okay, of course. We don't make her wear earmuffs in public. And what if she gave a big E to my kid? Well, let's say that she's also a carrier. That's a 1/2 chance. And then I also have a 1/2 chance, right? You're going to learn that would be a 1/4 chance, right? That our kid would be biggie. Okay, can't you see? Somehow your words, well, anyway. Okay, so let's talk about probability a little bit and see if you can figure this out with me. All right. So, the laws of probability, okay, they govern Mendelian inheritance. Mendel's laws of segregation and independent assortment reflect the rules of probability. So, when tossing a coin, the outcome of one toss has no impact on the outcome of the next toss. That was that idiot that I was friends with. He really thought past events affect future outcomes. It's not the case. Right? You can even think about chromosomes if you want to. For example, let's talk about the sex of a child. Okay, so that girls, you got to give an X to your kid. That's all. So the girl doesn't determine the sex of her kid. She still has to give that sex chromosome her X, but a guy can either give the X or the Y. Okay, so it's really up to the guy what the sex of the child is going to be. So if you give an X, 1/2 chance, you make a girl. If you give a Y, 1/2 chance, you can make a boy. Okay, now I was, what's the word? Blessed with 2 daughters, right? I love them. So point is, what are the odds that my third kid, I already had 2 daughters, what are the odds that my third kid would be a boy, right? It's still just 1/2. Past events have nothing to do with it, right? You could have families with 5 boys or 5 girls. It doesn't matter. The next one is an equal chance. Okay, so past events don't affect future outcomes. In the same way, the alleles of one gene segregate into gametes independently of another gene's alleles. What that's trying to say is that, yeah, when you make your sperm or your eggs, it's the same thing. It's just past events make no different, and it's just you put whatever you put in there, and the odds are what the odds are. Okay? So, we have two rules that we have to talk about today. Okay? The rule of multiplication and the rule of addition. And the way that we're going to discuss them today is dealing with a monohybrid cross. Now, if you remember what a monohybrid cross is, that's like the Mendel started with true breeders, let's just say, tall and short. So big T tall, little t short. They were your P generation. When you mate them together, you get your F1, which was big T, little t. And if you mate those together, you get your 3-to-1 phenotypic, 1-2-to-1 genotypic. So we're gonna look at that a little bit again, okay, and solve some problems. But the rule of multiplication, it just states that the probability that two or more independent events will occur together is the product of their individual probabilities, right? So, for example, let's just think back for a second about having a girl, okay? What are the odds that a couple could have a female baby? Well, think about it. The girl, it doesn't matter. She's 100% X, so she's 1 basically. It doesn't matter. But the guy is 50-50, right? 1/2 chance of X, 1/2 chance of Y. So because the girl, doesn't matter as far as the sex of the kid is involved, it's a 1/2 chance, right? 1 times 1/2, the rule of multiplication. 100% of the X here, so 1 times 1/2 is 1/2, okay? So you can also look at it as the monohybrid cross, right? So probability in an F1 monohybrid cross can be determined using the multiplication rule. So segregation in a heterozygous plant is like flipping a coin. So this is basically talking about like big T, little t times big T, little t, right? So if I'm big T, little t, each gamete would have a 1/2 chance of carrying the big T or the dominant allele and a 1/2 chance of carrying the recessive allele. Okay, it's kind of like flipping coins here. Okay, so believe it or not, when you do a pedigree, I'm sorry, not a pedigree, but a Punnett square, you're actually doing the probability. Okay, so for example, let's do segregation and use the rule of multiplication here. So here you can see, okay, in this case we have a girl here. She's making eggs, okay, and she's going to be down here. So you can see that she's a heterozygote, big R, little r. Now, what are the odds that she puts a big R into her eggs? Well, of course, it's going to be a 1/2 chance through meiosis. What are the odds that she puts a little r? 1/2 chance through meiosis. Now, what about this guy over here? He's also a heterozygote. What are the odds that he puts a big R into a sperm? Well, 1/2 chance. And what are the odds of a little r? 1/2 chance. Okay. So we didn't actually write out these fractions before, but that's okay. We've done enough of these Punnett squares now. So now you know how to do this. It's just big R and big R come together right here. Big R, big R. Okay, and you can see how we fill in the Punnett square, of course. Now, think of the mathematics, though. This right here, for this guy to put a big R in his sperm, it's like flipping a coin. It's a 1/2 chance, right? Meiosis, there's a chance of what you put in any given sperm. There was also an independent event that happened over here where a girl had a 1/2 chance of putting an R in her egg, a big R. So my question to you now is, let's use the rule of multiplication. What are the odds that both of those things happen for, this would be, again, random fertilization, right? Which egg and which sperm are going to come together? Well, we're talking about this sperm and this egg coming together. So how would we solve that now? Well, it's a 1/2 chance of the sperm and a 1/2 chance of the egg. 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4, right? So if you forget how to multiply or add fractions together, that's okay. We're going to do some problems in a second. But you might want to go back and look at that if you have to. And I'm not making fun because that's something you learned when you were a little kid. But it's been a while, I'm sure. Okay. So that's the rule of multiplication. When you want to combine independent events, you simply get the product. Okay. However, moving along here, we also have the addition rule. Okay, and this one's a bit goofy, actually. Okay, sometimes kids get confused by this. It states that the probability that any one of 2 or more exclusive events will occur is calculated by adding their individual probabilities together. Okay, it can be used to figure out the F2 plant from a monohybrid cross will be a heterozygote rather than a homozygote. Okay, and I know that sounds confusing, so here's my hint, and here's what I usually tell kids. If you're talking about the rule of multiplication, that one's easy. It's just two independent events. When you want to find out what are the odds of both of these things happen, put them together and multiply them. The rule of addition is when you can get two different things, okay? Or when you get, maybe I'll put it this way, when you can get the exact same result in two different ways, then you add those independent results together. So you probably had to use the rule of multiplication, but if you're looking at the same thing that you can get in different ways, you add them together. I know that's confusing, so that's why we're going to solve some together. But let's go back for a second and look at this. So for example, the rule of multiplication we covered up here. Yeah, sure, a 1/2 chance of big R and a 1/2 chance of this. 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4. But take a look at this parent right here and this parent right here. If I said, hey, what are the odds that they can make a heterozygote? Well, now looking down here, you'd say, well, oh, that's actually a 1/2 chance. That's 1, 2 out of 4 squares. That's 1/2. How do you do the math behind that? Well, you basically have to figure out that this is a 1/4 chance if mom gave the dominant and dad gave the recessive, but this is also a 1/4 chance if dad gave the dominant and mom gave the recessive. And then how did you get 1/2? Well, 1/4 plus 1/4 is 1/2. And again, you might need to brush up on your adding of fractions if you have to. Okay? So I don't know if you're quite there yet or if that was pretty easy for you, but let's go ahead and solve some problems together and make sure we understand the laws or the rules of probability and genetics. All right. Okay, so here we go with the rules of probabilities here, and we're going to start with the rule of multiplication. So this is a pretty simple problem. It says the chance of big T little t and big T little t producing little t little t. So as you know, that's saying the chance of a tall heterozygote and a tall heterozygote producing a short plant. Okay, we're talking about pea plants here like Gregor Mendel. Well, all you have to do here is say, well, let's just pretend that this person right here is the guy. Okay, so we have a male, and he is big T little t. And he's going to mate to a female who is also big T little t. And we want to know the chance that these two plants are going to produce a short plant. Okay, so let's have a look here. The first thing I'd like you to tell me is, hey, what are the odds, if we need short, you know that that's going to be, sorry about this, again, my camera going crazy. You know that a short is going to be little t, right? So what are the odds that this guy is going to give a little t in his sperm? Big T little t would 1/2, right? This person has a 1/2 chance of a little t in his sperm cell. What are the odds that this girl pea plant, okay, and I know that's silly to say, is going to have a little t in her egg? 1/2 chance that she's going to put a t in her egg. So now, what are the odds of this happening? Right? What are the odds? Well, you need to multiply because these are two independent events. This guy had a 1/2 chance of putting a little t in a sperm. This girl had a 1/2 chance of putting a little t in an egg. So technically, 1/2 times 1/2 equals 1 times 1 is 1. The denominator, 2 times 2 is 4. There we go. We have a 1/4 chance. And you might say, well, wait a second, Mr. Boylan. Can't we just do this? Well, sure you can. We don't really care about that. We don't care so much about that or that. But there it is. So out of the possible offspring, 1/4 has it. So by you completing Punnett squares, you're actually doing the probability. You're doing the math. That's Reginald Punnett found a way to make these squares so it does the math for you. Okay? So what we just practiced here was two independent events occurring. And how do you figure out what you're going to get there? Well, you use the rule of multiplication. Okay? Okay, so let's try another problem and see, what's going on here. So, what about this? Same parents, right? Chance of big T, little t. Okay, all right. Well, again, if you want to be clever, you could just say, well, it's right there, Mr. Boylan. It's 2 out of 4 squares. It's 50%. Sure, but can you do it mathematically? Okay, and this one's going to use the rule of multiplication again and the rule of addition. Let's see how it works. All right, so again, if I wanted big T, little t, and you know that I have a guy here, and he's going to mate to this girl. Okay, so, and what we're looking for now is the chances of a heterozygote. So two heterozygotes, what are the odds that they make a heterozygote? This is basically Gregor Mendel's F1 cross to make the F2, right? So you started off with big T times little t, true breeders. His F1 were all this, so now you mate the F1 together to get the F2. Let's use the rules of probability. Okay, so to get a big T, little t, what are the odds that this guy puts a big T in his sperm? 1/2, of course, right? Okay, and then what would mom have to give? Well, she would have to give the little t. And we just did it. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. Oh, there's a 1/4 chance of big T, little t. Aha, that was if he gave the sperm, okay, with a big T, and she gave the egg with a little t. But don't forget, this can happen in a different way. What if Dad had a 1/2 chance of giving the little t, and now Mom has a 1/2 chance, but she'd have to give the big T? If both of these independent events happened, which are different, right? This is a unique setup of independent events here. Well, 1 times 1 is 1 in the numerator. 2 times 2 is 4 in the denominators. Aha! So this is a completely different way to do it, but now we also get a 1/4 chance, right? So now how can you figure out, well, we use the rule of multiplication. How can you figure out the total answer here? Oh, now we use the rule of addition. Okay, so you already did the rule of multiplication, but the rule of addition says, hey, if you can get the same thing in a different way, all right, go ahead and add or get the sum of those separate probabilities. So if Dad gave the dominant allele and Mom gave the recessive, there's a 1/4 chance of that. But what if Dad gave the little t and Mom gave the big T? There's a 1/4 chance of that. Now, how do you add fractions? 1 plus 1, the numerator, equals 2, and 4 is just the denominator. That just stays. Remember, the denominator has to be the same when you're adding. So 2 out of 4, which of course reduces to 1/2. Now, if you go back up here and look, oh baby, there they are. There's the two heterozygotes. Hey, what if Mom gave the little t? Well, then Dad has to give the big T. But what if Dad gave the big T? Well, then Mom has to give the little t. It's a 2 out of 4 chance, right? Or what you could say is a 1/2 chance. That's all, guys. That's all the rules of probability are. Okay, it's just that simple. What if I asked you, hey, what are your odds of flipping a head on a coin? You would say, oh, well, my odds of flipping a head is 1/2. I said, well, what are your odds of flipping 2 heads in a row? Okay. All right, well, that's a different type of problem then. If I said the odds of flipping a head equals 1/2, right? And then I said, hey, what are your odds of flipping 2 heads in a row? You would say, well, that's easy, Mr. Boylan. That's a 1/4 chance, right? But now listen to how tricky these can get. What if I asked you this question? Hey, what are the odds that your third flip is a head? You know what the answer would be? 1/2. That's an independent event, right? Because all I asked was, what is the odds that your third flip of a coin would be a head? 1/2. Now, what if I asked you this question? Hey, what are the odds that your 3 flips are all heads? Ah. See that? See how it's different? Okay, so the rules of probability are pretty interesting. You just have to understand the way that it's being asked, all right? And we'll see how you do on this stuff, okay? So I hope that video was helpful to you, and it's a pretty simple concept. You've actually already been doing it, and you can make it as complex or as easy as you want to. It's just really, you dive in, you're doing Punnett squares already, so you might as well understand why you're setting up a Punnett square, you know, the way you are, and it's all because of the mathematics, the probability behind it. Okay, good luck.